Hi, welcome back. This is Nonverbal Communication, and let's talk Turkey with Jayne Turk. Glad to see you. So, we're going to talk this week about nonverbal communication, which is messages beyond words. And so, it involves a lot, but we're going to start with the things that you typically think of when you think about nonverbal. And so nonverbal is typically going to be facial expressions and body language. There's a lot more than that, but that's where we're going to start. It also includes extraverbal, that is, the way you say things. So the difference between I love you and I love you and love you. So the extraverbal, the emphasis, the way we say things. Not being a guy, I don't have firsthand experience with this, but I've seen a lot of it and heard a lot of it. And for guys, when your voice is changing and it squeaks there in the middle and you're trying to say something really seriously, even though everyone knows what's happening, we still hear the extraverbal squeak and we give it all of this weight and meaning that it really shouldn't have. In fact, that's true for all of nonverbal. We weigh nonverbal far more heavily than we weigh the words themselves. And it makes sense because we can say one thing and say the exact words and mean so many different things. And yet, sometimes the way we say something really isn't the important part. So think about, for instance, when you're sick. You might say, absolutely, I'm super excited about that. But it comes out, absolutely, I'm super excited about that. Well, even though we might know that you're sick and we know that that's what we're seeing and observing, in our understanding, we're interpreting that the way the nonverbal leads us to interpret it. Nonverbal communication is highly dependent on culture. So the same things that I might do in my culture, if I'm traveling, I want to be careful about because they can have very different meanings. And by that same token, in your tiny microculture, so the area you live or within your family even, there might be nonverbal communication things that do not translate to outside of that tiny environment. And finally, there are all kinds of rules about nonverbal communication, the rules that dictate how we interpret things and what we can do and what we're not allowed to do. So, let's continue. So, when we talk about the types of nonverbal communication, we're going to talk about body movement and gestures. So, this is the first category I start with because it is probably the thing that we think of most closely when we think of nonverbal communication. So it could be all of the, waving hello. It could be all of the things you think of in terms of how our bodies consume space. The example that I gave for you though was the okay gesture. And so that yes, things are okay, which by the way has different meanings in different cultures depending on which way it's facing. And unfortunately, although I'm sure many of you use this entirely innocently, it's now been classified as hate speech because hate groups are using it as a signal to each other that they are members of that same hate group. So a gesture that can have perfectly innocent meanings can change how it's interpreted over time, at least in certain groups. So when we talk about nonverbal communication, and how closely those things are weighed, how important they are. Understand that you may not know what the meanings are that other people are assigning to the gestures you're using. Your voice, and we talked a little bit about this in terms of emphasis, but it also has things like vocal fry or raising the pitch of your sentences on end so it sounds like you're asking questions. Those kinds of vocalics also have an impact on how you are interpreted or your meaning is interpreted. And touch. So when allowed, when welcome, touch is one of the most powerful ways that we can communicate nonverbally. In fact, when we get to conflict, I'm going to talk about one of the ways that you have difficult conversations is by inviting your partner to hold your hand. And that invitation is what matters. Whether or not they accept is okay. They know that you are, at a very basic level, letting them into your space. Touch, as we can see in this picture here, is also a typical kind of greeting, and different cultures are going to have different ways of greeting. So here you saw the French double cheek kiss, which, again, culturally dependent and has meanings appropriate in one culture and maybe not another. And your appearance. So everything about you, we're going to talk a little bit more about clothing in a minute, but everything about you and the way that you present is communicating nonverbally. So I pulled up the wedding guest attire guidelines because these are things that I would never know. In fact, when I am going to a wedding, I talk to lots of people about what's appropriate to wear. But the way that you present yourself, as we mentioned earlier, there are all kinds of rules about it, and you may not know those rules. So it's good to find out. And physical space. And physical space has lots of connotations. I really love the example of airports. So for those of you that have flown before, you may recognize these horrific sitting in the airport seats with your backs next to each other. And if you choose to sit in two chairs that are next to each other, you are right on top of next to each other. So if you're traveling with someone and the airport's crowded and you're sitting next to each other, you're doing the weird leaning over in your seat so as not to have your face right in their space as soon as you start talking to them. But it's very weird to make that eye contact because you're doing this weird thing. And I hate having a person sit right behind me. That just feels very uncomfortable and very weird and very much in my space bubble. And folks, this is totally intentional, because if you're super uncomfortable sitting in those airport seats, you might get up and go into one of the restaurants and have a $19 bologna and cheese sandwich and a $17 Bud Light, because it's much more comfortable to sit in one of those little restaurants than it is to sit in those chairs where you are right next to and right behind each other. So we'll get more to physical space, but I wanted to make sure that we address that part of it. And the physical environment is more than just the space and more than just the furniture. It's everything about it, including, for those of you that work in offices, the temperature wars. So what temperature do we want our office to be? Or what temperature do we want our home to be? That's part of the physical environment. And it's communicating something nonverbally. If you've watched just a few cop shows on TV, you've seen them turn up the heat in interrogation rooms because it changes the physical environment and makes the guilt party more likely to confess. The physical environment also includes how we have, as we saw in the airport example, laid out furniture, but it also includes the kind of furniture we have in there. So fast food restaurants, and we're going to talk about color in a minute, but they definitely use color in a way that is advantageous to them. They also typically use seats that put lots of pressure on your low back. So they will include some bench seating that's got cushions, it looks comfortable, or it's got cushions on the back, so it looks comfortable, but the actual bottom part of the seat where you're sitting is super hard. Again, specifically intended for high turnover. So that way you'll sit down, you will not get comfortable, you'll eat quickly and get out of there. So the physical environment has a huge impact on us. And finally, time. So, hi, I'm Jayne, and I am chronically late. Now, I'm really good at being on time to class, and I have to work very hard at it. I mentioned to my husband the other day that I had an appointment with my boss this morning at 10 a.m. California time, and I just mentioned it in passing, and then later on he was like, oh yeah, I set an alarm for that, because he knows that I struggle with time. How you use time, how early or late you are, is definitely a part of your nonverbal communication. And the meaning that people assign to it may not have anything to do with the meaning that you intended or the meaning that you experience, but it has to do with the way that it's interpreted. So let's talk color. This is one of my favorite pieces of nonverbal communication. And I hope that you'll do a little bit more research into this because I find it really fascinating and I think you will too. So when we talk about color, I want to be very clear. We're not talking about the colors you like. We're talking about how color impacts you psychologically. And we're talking about, it could be everything from the paint colors on the walls to the color of clothing that you're wearing. But color has an impact on us, and it has certain predictable impacts on us. And I guarantee you that big corporations have spent lots and lots and lots of money to find out what those impacts are and how they can manipulate you. So let's talk about fast food. I want you to think about the colors that you see in fast food restaurants. And there's going to be a palette that is very specific and is repeated over and over and over again because there are 3 colors that make it more likely that you are going to eat more food, that you are going to eat more quickly, and that you're going to be stimulated. And so those colors, and you may have guessed, are orange and yellow and red. Unfortunately, we've also discovered that if you paint your kitchen that bright, sunny yellow, that happy, warm color, that typically over the course of a year, you're going to gain an extra 15 pounds because that bright, sunny yellow is going to encourage you to eat more frequently and more often and more quickly. It's going to spur your appetite. So if you are struggling to eat, if you need to spur your appetite, definitely go for that yellow paint color. The opposite end of the spectrum, we have fine dining. So if you've ever been to a really fancy restaurant, you're going to note that they have very similar color schemes no matter what fancy restaurant it is. So let's see if your color guesses are the same as mine. So forest green, a dark, rich green is going to be in there. Navy blue is going to be in there, and burgundy is going to be in there. And those very rich colors, in my head, I see like the old fancy castle library. Is that warm, soothing? This is where you're going to go in and you're going to have before dinner drinks. You're going to have appetizers. You're going to have a multi-course meal. You're going to have after dinner drinks. You're going to have a dessert. You're going to have after dessert coffee. You're going to stay there a long time. Those seats are going to be significantly more comfortable because they want you to linger and keep ordering. So, yes, again, lots of money's been spent in determining these factors. I have to throw in here babies because another thing that we've done a ton of research on. And unfortunately, I want to get back to that bright, sunny yellow. It's also considered to be a gender-neutral color. And so lots of new parents-to-be paint their baby's nursery in this bright, sunny, happy yellow color. Unfortunately, the research shows that babies that are in yellow rooms or environments with a lot of yellow cry more often and for longer. So please, no sunny yellow baby rooms, no yellow baby quilts. Find a different gender-neutral color if that's what you're going for. I recommend a light pastel green or a sage or a, depending on your climate, maybe a pale blue. So when you're thinking about colors, you want to think about what you're going to be doing in the space. So if you had a space that was super high energy and you needed it to always be somewhat chaotic, you might go for one of those bright, vivid reds or pops of red. If you have a space that you want to be relaxing, i.e., you want it to be a place where you're going to sleep, you might go with that mint green or a sage green, that calming tone. I mentioned blue earlier, so a pale blue color can make an environment feel much cooler. It can be relaxing, but if it's in a climate where there is snow on the ground, you might want to avoid the let it snow vibe with the pale blue and get something that's going to warm up the temperature feeling a little bit, even if you want to keep it fairly relaxing and chill in the not temperature sense. Do consider, though, what you're going to be doing in that environment. And so wherever you're studying right now, wherever you're watching this video or listening to this audio, I want you to take a look around that environment. Do the colors that are there make it conducive for you to do what you want to do? So if you are studying, are you in an environment that encourages focus? If you are relaxing, are you in an environment that encourages relaxing? So take a look and see if there's maybe some color changes that we could make to make that environment more user-friendly. And so the energy and focus, the energy versus focus is a really important factor. If you're in an area where you're studying, you don't want it to be a place that's going to make you fall asleep, but you also don't want it to be so bright that you are feeling overwhelmed. One semester, I had a student tell me that my clothes were too bright and made it really hard to focus for him in the classroom. I don't really know what to do with that information, but I totally get it, and it fits in with what we're talking about in terms of color. So next, let's talk about layout. So home spaces, and home spaces have changed in the United States a lot over the past 50 years. So in the 70s, when America was undergoing some prosperity, we saw homes get significantly bigger. And in that bigger prospect, we initially went to really big living rooms. And then people very quickly realized that having a room that was 25 feet across was not conducive for communication or the other kinds of things that we typically wanted to do in a living space. And so as homes have changed over time in the United States, we've seen bedrooms get bigger. And so it's quite common in a kid's bedroom to have, first off, it's quite common to have their own space, which is not common in most cultures around the world. It is quite common to have a desk in there, a TV or a video game or a computer space. And what happens when you have home spaces that are separated like that is you have more and more people spending time in their own room and less time congregating and spending time together. And I think that you get to choose how you want that balance to be. I just want it to be one of the considerations that you are thinking about, is how do we want to develop the space in a way that makes our family look like what we want our family to look like. So home spaces, you are balancing privacy, and you're balancing that privacy with togetherness. It looks very different in cultures around the world, the way that homes are laid out and what their expectations for privacy are and what their expectations for togetherness are. And many Americans who are traveling abroad have a hard time with this because they are used to the American version of what home spaces look like. So definitely something to consider. I also want you to think about your workspaces. So I thought it was really funny when I was studying this years ago, and it came up that the more important you are, the more likely you are to have your own bathroom or be close to a bathroom. So if you're less important, you might have to walk all the way across campus to use a bathroom, or you might have to have a hike to do that. But if you are super important, you might have your own private bathroom or one that is almost private. But workspaces are about much more than bathrooms. I like to look at how people have their desks arranged and how they have that seating in there arranged. So I've been working in academia for a really long time. And I find that some people have their desks, and then right next to the desk or kitty corner or on the other side of it, right there, there's a chair for visitors. And the more important people get in the administration and higher up they get, farther back those guest chairs are. So it is quite common if you are visiting the college president or an administrator to be 15 feet away from them when you're sitting in the guest chair. And it's important to look at those things because of how we view distance and power. And my office is tiny, but I have it structured so I have the desk behind me when I'm talking with a guest, so there is no barrier between us. and we're more easily able to make eye contact and have it be more of a connective space than a distant space. If your work environment doesn't involve desks and space, take a look around and how much space are you allotted in that work environment? How much privacy are you allotted? How close are people when they come in? And take a look at all of the elements that go into layout. I didn't talk about lighting, but lighting is part of our physical space, and some fascinating studies have been done with lighting. So again, something else to read about. I encourage you, if you're building your own home, to put lots of dimmer switches because different people like different levels of light. So again, another factor into how we use the physical space around us. And finally, I like to talk about seat choice. Particularly as a college professor, it's fascinating to me to watch people come in and choose a seat. And if you know the rules, you know that the first person in gets to choose wherever they want to sit. Typically, it's in the back of the room. But the second person in has less choice because unless they are BFFs with the first person, they're going to sit as far away from person number one as they easily can sit. And so that's how we fill in, is you don't sit right down next to somebody unless you're already good friends with them. You sit as far away as you can, triangulating that with how the space is laid out. And so it works if you're going into a cafeteria or a restaurant. It works if you are going into those airport seats we looked at a minute ago, is that you don't sit down right next to somebody unless that is the last seat available. And then if you do, you compensate by that by making yourself as small as possible. Fascinating stuff about nonverbal. And although it has nothing to do really with layout, it also has to do with how we use space. I'm going to assume that all of you have ridden in an elevator. And so there are nonverbal rules about elevator space that you get in and you push the button and then you line up with your back to a wall or the door. But again, as far away from other people as you can. And none of you make eye contact as the elevator is moving. And usually you don't talk, or if you do, it's very superficial. Rules. Who'd have thunk? I have to say, I am not the inspirational person to talk to you about clothing. One of my former colleagues used to say that everybody on our campus should be on the TV show What Not to Wear, and I am the poster child for having no idea how to dress. So understand that I'm talking about this from the academic viewpoint and not my own personal success. So please don't judge what I'm wearing based according to what we're going to talk about here. So that brings me to, how do you know what to wear? If you're a high self-monitor, that is, that you are very aware what other people are doing and very aware what the rules are, this is easy for you. You can look around and you can say, aha, this is business casual. I do admit to calling up somebody and saying, I said business casual, what does that mean? Because, yeah, I didn't know. And the internet today obviously will help you with that, assuming that you get somebody or some bot on the internet that is kindly dispositioned towards you and is going to give you that good information. So you can know by observing and you can know by asking. Sometimes you'll be at workplaces or schools that will have dress codes where everything will be spelled out, but even there it can be confusing. And so there's lots of room for misinterpretation. So the short answer is observe people that you think are dressing well, and if you can, develop friendships with them and ask them. But that you may not know just by observing because you might not be picking up on the subtle cues. I worked near Hewlett-Packard back in the day, and it was really funny because at the end of the day, you'd see all of the people leaving the corporate offices. It looked like they were wearing uniforms. Back then, they all wore blue striped suits with white blouses or white shirts. And every single person wore some variation on that theme. So I would have loved working there because I would have known exactly what to wear, as opposed to the great uncertainty that usually plagues me. Understand that there are going to be regional levels of formality or informality that you might need to ask about. So when I taught at Colorado State University, it was much more formal than the West Coast where I'd done all of my other undergraduate work. And I was not prepared for that. I was not prepared to see students who not atypically wore dresses or ties to class. And today it may be significantly more informal, but I know that on the East Coast, we're going to still see a higher level of formality at work and in college classrooms, as well as at social events. Most workplaces are not going to have a specific dress code. They are going to have work expectations. And yes, it needs to be said that a lot of those work expectations are based on sexist and often racist beliefs that underlie the system. Regardless of whether you're going to live up to them or down to them, I think that you should still know what they are. So work expectations are going to vary dramatically according to the line of work you're in, according to where that work is located, and according to what the people in power think. I was looking today at a TikTok that said some school districts are charging their faculty members, charging their teachers $5 a day to be allowed to wear jeans. I wore jeans for a long time in my career as a teacher, and I would not have been happy to pay $5 a day for the privilege of wearing jeans that were super appropriate for what I was teaching. Work expectations are also going to be based on what the work culture is and how people perceive. Are you interacting with the public? Are you interacting with other employees? What degree of formality do we have? And oddly enough, this work culture is not at all dependent on how much money you're being paid. You do want to be aware of what the rules are versus the norms. So there will be job sites, for instance, that will require you to wear closed-toed shoes or non-slip shoes if you're in a service industry. And understand that those are safety rules as opposed to norms, which may say things like, even though black pants are required, black jeans are not normally accepted or encouraged. So you want to know what the rules versus the norms are. Okay, so let's talk about the discussion board. This week's discussion board is going to have you do one post by Wednesday, as we've been doing, and it's going to identify one part of your home, your office, or your classroom that impacts communication and brainstorm ways you could change it to better encourage communication. So I'm going to give you an example. You got to come up with your own. My kitchen is galley style, and so there isn't a lot of room for people to hang out. But there is a way that I could, without remodeling, I could change it to make it more of a hangout space where people could be there when we're cooking, cleaning, eating, doing the hangout kinds of conversational things. And it actually has to do with, I have a bar wall, and it tends to be a place where we store stuff. And if I cleaned that off and put out some chairs, some comfy bar chairs there, it could be a place where we could have better communication. Now, when you're looking at your space, you might be looking at colors, and you might not be able to paint, but you could maybe hang up colorful things on the walls. And you can even go super cheap and get flat sheets at Walmart for a couple bucks and use those as decor pieces. So I want you to think about something that you could change and to just brainstorm what you could do and how it would work and how it would impact communication. So that's going to be the first part. You thinking about your space, just one space. You don't have to do all three, just one space and how you could change it. And then by Sunday, come back and read your classmates' posts and respond to two of them and brainstorm with them. Suggest some additional ways to change the environment. So, simple, easy. I want you to think about things you could do. And as you look around, you might be thinking about places you've been that had a more positive environment, businesses you've been to, all the places that, for instance, put up fresh flowers. Yeah, cool stuff. And the Sim Journal. So Sim Journal is, again this week, after responding to your classmates' discussion board posts, I want you to reflect on nonverbal communication and what you've learned as per usual, and get that simulation journal going in there. So, easy peasy. Before I go on to next steps, I want to throw two other factors that you might consider in your discussion board post in your life. One of them is fire. So if you're in a place that is got a cold climate and a fireplace, we know that adding a fireplace, having a fire in a fireplace, is something that helps warm up the figurative environment as well as the literal environment. But the other one is water. And we talked a little bit about water when we talked about emotions. So with water, you could have an aquarium, you could have a water fountain, but having that moving water in there can also positively impact your environment. So think about those things. Okay, next steps. I wanted to let you know that the third paper option is now live and available if you want to do that. It is on the Personal Behavior Change Project. And if you haven't seen it already, the midterm Quizzy Poo is also live. And for those of you wondering why it's called a Quizzy Poo, it has to do with language. It is impossible to be scared about a Quizzy Poo. If you tell people, oh my gosh, I have a Quizzy Poo coming up and I'm so nervous, they're going to tell you to get over it. It's not going to be a big scary thing. It's more about reflecting on what you're learning and applying it to your life. Your life. You're the expert on that. We'll be good. And in case no one said it today, I love you. This has been Let's Talk Turkey with Jayne Turk. And if this content is content you appreciate, please like, follow, and share. And boy, that's weird to say. I love you. Have a great week.